The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and thank you for joining today's web training session, Requirement and Quality Integrated Hybrid Agile, Part 1. My name is Renee Alanis. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at TechExcel. TechExcel is proud to host our first in a series of hybrid Agile specification-driven development training. Now, for a little logistics about today's session, I'd like to remind everyone that the training is 3 hours long. We will provide 2 breaks during the training to give everyone time to attend their own needs. As a reminder, this is only Part 1, and be sure you've registered for Part 2 training as well. You can find the link to register for Part 2 in the chat feature tab in your left-hand corner. Part 2 will begin tomorrow at the same time, 9 a.m. Pacific to 12 p.m. Pacific. During the training session, I do encourage all of you to use the question function located at the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Just type in your question, and we will answer them at various times throughout the day. We will also have a chance for class participation through poll taking and trainee presentations. To participate in a presentation during the appropriate time, use the Raise Your Hand feature, and we will call on you to discuss your answer. The polls are located in the poll field in your lower left-hand corner near the Question tab. We will use the polls at various times throughout the session as well. And one last item. We would really appreciate if you filled out the webinar survey at the end of today's presentation. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker and trainer, Dr. Tiran Zhou. Tiran is the CEO and founder of TechExcel and SpecDD methodology. Welcome, Tiran.
Thank you, Renee. So today we will give the web-based training on SpecDD. I am the founder of the methodology. I have been giving conference speakings on this topic. I also have been conducting classroom trainings for this method. Today we start to give training web-based, and we would like to continue to give this web-based trainings. If it's not monthly, it will be every 2 months. And we'll continue to also give classroom trainings. So hopefully one day SpecDD training will be happening in a nearby cities of you. So we'll talk about on day one's agenda. So we'll start with what is SpecDD, and then we'll quickly discuss Scrum process and its limitations. And then we start to use a real-world project that I experienced to drive the idea of why SpecDD was created and why requirement-driven quality integrated agile process is more suitable for real-world project. And then we'll be talking about the SpecDD process model. And today's session on day one will be covering more on the core process of the SpecDD model, which is the development process. Then we start to talk about why requirement-driven, and we'll just explain what is a sprint workload and how the sprint workload get finished on the daily basis. And we talk about the burn-down reports, the benefits of using time-based, time-remaining estimate versus point estimate. Then we'll talk about the SpecDD job roles and how the certification of the learning process work. And we continuously to use topics and presentation by the members of this class, and we'll conclude with day one summary. So how can you participate? We'll be giving questions as polls. So these questions are very easy to answer. It's designed for all of us to easily look at the question and give answers, and to not necessarily to study your answer to be correct or not correct, but by reviewing all the answers from all of us. Today we have about 30 members. So we will know, will be some interesting distributions of people's answers. And using such answer and question and answers, I can also tell how do I improve my topics for the remainder of the training. And if you do have time, have questions you want to ask for some answers, please post your questions. Use the GoToWebinar question tab, and then I will try to select some questions to answer. For the training topic discussions, I have designed 2 of them, so hopefully we'll have enough time to give the training topic discussions for both of them. So you will be spending we'll be giving about 10 to 15 minutes actually. So it will include 5 minutes break time, but I would encourage all of you to spend about 10 minutes of time to prepare for the answers. And then hopefully some of you will raise your hand and want to give presentations. If none of you raise a hand, then I will try to just pick up somebody. So somebody will be giving the presentation of such discussion topics. And if for those of you who like this training, who find that SpecDD as a methodology will help you to make your development Agile method, Agile practice to be more scalable, to be more balanced, I will strongly encourage you to become certified SpecDD master. So we will post a recording of this training in about, I will say about 1 month's time. It will be available only to members who attended this training. And you're welcome to visit SpecDD.com and review the training. And from there, you can actually take the SpecDD Master Certification exam. And once you pass the exam, then you will be given with more privileges, and you can submit blogs and submit articles on the SpecDD website. So what is SpecDD? SpecDD is a hybrid Agile software development method for managing software projects. It is an Agile method. It is based on the fact that pure Agile method, like Scrum in the real world, is very useful. It is effective to improve a development team's productivity, but also recognize that pure Agile method lacks of the scalability for multi-team, large Agile projects. So SpecDD is designed to be in a hybrid Agile method, and is also designed for managing both Agile and non-Agile processes. So how developed methods are being used in the real world projects? Based on leading analyst firms market survey, we see a similar number, consistent number, like this slide shows. As of today, were end of last year. Most of the development teams actually do not use any specific method to manage their development processes. 30% of the small business teams use Agile method, 19% use iterative, 7% use waterfall, and 6% use measurement-based. Measurement-based include also CMMI, this kind of method. And for enterprise, bigger company development teams, the number is similar, and 30% use Agile, iterative, 20%. So you would conclude, as of today, the leading method is Agile. If you include iterative method to be a kind of Agile method, where development is more divided into iterations, then really majority of the teams are using Agile development method. And while you will conclude the development method are being shifting from more traditional waterfall-like process to Agile process. But then this slide shows you something interesting because for those teams who are using Agile, they actually practice Agile process often with a hybrid practice, meaning like 38% of the Agile teams are actually mixing both multiple Agile methods, and 35 are mixing Agile method with traditional method. Only 27% of such teams rely on pure single Agile method. So what does it mean? It means in the real world, when development teams start to practice Agile, they realize the needs of customizing Agile process to include traditional method best functions such as quality management, such as resource planning, such as requirement management with the Agile method. And often people mix Agile process by using best practices functions from multiple methods, from Scrum, from XP. So before I continue, I would like to take a poll on how many of you are using Agile and how familiar you are. So Renee, did you publish a question?
I did. And I need to share the screen to show you the answer.
Actually, I can see.
Okay.
50% are very familiar with, and 50% are familiar with Agile, but not practice it. And so right now we have about 48 attendees now. So meaning, indeed, Agile is becoming the future of development. So while all of you know Agile method, but as Agile become the main development method, Agile, clearly is showing that the future of development is Agile. But as a founder of a SpecDD development method, I started to study Agile 8 years ago. I also realized that the future of development is Agile, but I believe the future of Agile is hybrid. That doesn't mean I don't like pure Agile method. Method like a Scrum, to me, create an Agile culture for development teams to enjoy the productivity gain. It makes the industry of software development to enjoy a much more practical and easily useful Agile method. And it actually is shaping the future of our development. Our development used to be strictly waterfall. And then CMMI, such measurement-driven method become available to us. And then we spend a tremendous amount of time studying guidelines like these areas of optimizing our process like CMMI. And then we only to find it's so hard for our development team members to study such guidelines and to remember them and to be able to constantly using such best practices in our daily work. And then Scrum came. As the method is so simple, it becomes very useful, and team member can practice it easily. But as Agile becomes popular, becomes so useful, people start to practice it, we want our team to be more scalable. We want the process to be more maintainable. That's why we see Agile teams are practicing Agile process in a hybrid way. But before we talk too much about the future being hybrid, let's appreciate what is a Scrum process and what Scrum can do for us. Well, Scrum rely on the team. Team are the people who are involved or who are directly contributing to our development process and results. And we introduce a set of roles. The roles like the product owner, Scrum Master, development team, we further group them as picks. And the roles are the customer, the users, the stakeholders, the salespersons who are selling the software, the support peoples who are troubleshooting and taking defects from the customers, the managers, the business high-level managers. They are the stakeholders. They are the chickens. So the story starts with like this. One day, the pig and the chicken are walking on the farm, and the chicken suggests, let's open a ham and an egg restaurant. So the pig paused, thought about that. So the pig answers, if so, then we're selling the meat, which means I'm sacrificing, and the egg, which to you do not need to sacrifice your life, but you want to be the owner of the restaurant as well. So if so, I would rather just run the restaurant myself. So while the story sounds very kind of controversial or contrasting, high contrast that owners of a process versus the shareholder of a process really belong to two group of people and leave me alone so that I can take care of the process myself. It does, to some degrees, is very helpful to build a self-driving team. In building a self-driving team for a process, a Scrum process, we further use some of the artifacts and processes like the user story, the product backlog, a release concept sprint, and a burn down report. So here is a diagram. So a development process in Scrum is mainly consists of a set of iterations. So this iteration, this is called a sprint. And multiple of them are continuously running. So the set of sprints really define the Scrum process. And this one sprint starts with a sprint backlog, which represents on day one, it's the commitment of what the team need to convert them, finish all the features as well as the defect, and convert them into the working software and deliver them so that the end users can use them. Every day this process is going, so this represents the daily stand-up meeting and the daily Scrum or the daily Agile. So what's really important is how do you select a set of features, functions, and a set of defects that you want to fix. Well, that is from the product backlog. Before the product backlog, obviously, you will have ideas, you will have customer requests, you will have suggestions from the salespersons, from the stakeholders. So therefore, the product owner is responsible to prioritize them, to create a product backlog, so that at the top of the backlog items, whether they are features, functions, or defects, represent the immediate attention that a Scrum team need to pick them up to become the commitment. And at the end, the team would use the spring review meeting to present the working software, the team members, the owner of the task who sacrifice, who convert such function and defect into the working software, they will present them. And then there's a retrospective meeting to talk about what can be improved. So before I continue, I want to take a poll. So question 1, is story a requirement? And the answer, there are 2 answers, yes and no. Question 2, how do you manage the requirement? Should we provide functional design and user interface before a sprint or during a sprint? Or we should not document functional user interface design at all? And or for some stories, we should add design. For others, we do not really need to add design or documentation for requirement. So let's take a look of one by one. Let's do the first one first.
Were you able to see the results?
Yes. So 64% says yes, in Agile development, a story is a requirement. 36% says no, it is just an abstract of a requirement. So before I comment these answers, I want to see the next question results. So let's.
Well, we've only, the way this is set up is we do one at a time. So to see this one, Let me see if I
Okay,
can
let's
launch.
do the next one. Let's wait for like 30 seconds. Oh,
Okay,
let's do
so
the next one. Yeah.
the second poll has been launched now.
So let's see.
So we'll keep this poll open for 30 more seconds.
Yeah. Okay, so before
Would you like to
okay,
discuss?
so the
number
answer on the second question, let's do the second question.
You want to look at the second question?
Yeah.
Okay, let me pull the second
So the question, second question, yeah, 36% says provide functional design and user interface design before a sprint start. 21% say it only do functional design and user interface during a sprint. And 43% says for some stories, we should add design, for others, we should not. So obviously, the answer to the question number one, to me, the better way is to view a story just as an abstract of a requirement. The reason is just like the question number two. Actually, for some of the stories, we don't really add design. And for some of the stories, we do, at least in the Scrum process. In the Scrum process, we believe requirements are changing that so often, we don't really need to document all the requirements. It will be more effective to simply create a story, represent an abstract of what needs to be done, and more rely on the face-to-face meetings and rely on the team to deliver. Obviously, you can say, yeah, that's fine, but the team might not be that capable in terms of understanding what the product owner wants, what the customer wants. Then, therefore, we should really have functional design, and we should have user interface design, and more detailed documentation on the requirement for such story. And then versus others believe, during the sprint, while you used to face-to-face meeting, the working software actually so often helps you to understand the requirement better. Therefore, you should catch up. You should really improve your functional design. And then it's absolutely true. For some of the stories, you don't really add design at all. And for others, you do. And actually, a Scrum process emphasizes requirement changes so often. So managing the document such requirement is not as effective as taking story just as an abstract. Okay, so for question number 3 and number 4, I just want to do it so that, without necessarily spending too much explain it, so question number 3, how much testing effort should be involved for each sprint? We should test as much as needed to ensure the working software is defect-free. And then second one, a good Agile will finish a sprint with no defect or almost defect-free. Number 3, not necessary. Developers should focus on development work. Just enough testing so the sprint workload can be finished at a desired quality level. And question number 4, let's do question number 3 first.
Okay, we'll leave the polls open for about 15 more seconds.
Yeah. So the answer is number 4 is dominating. Just enough testing so that the workload can be finished at a desired quality level, which I think is about right. Question number 3. Let's go question number 4. How to find defect for development sprint? Defect should be found by end user and QA team. Defect should be found by the end user only. Defect should be found by the end user and the Agile team. Defect should be found by the end user, the Agile team, and the QA team. Okay, so the answer to question number 4.
Well, I think people are still still voting. How about we close it right now?
Okay, so already 60% voted. So I would say about, so far 93% showing answering is by Agile team and the QA team and end users. So an Agile team in a Scrum process, please don't forget, includes and integrated QA members. So we'll continue now. So Scrum relies on a few meetings to make sure process are properly managed. And here's the burn down report, often used for monitoring the progress of an Agile sprint. So on the day 0, on the day 1, the features and the tasks are committed, representing the workload of a team for the entire sprint. So this line, the blue line, indicates the time remaining effort. The green line indicating the number of tasks that are still remain open. Obviously, the goal is to, on the day 0, all the tasks are created and all the time are estimated. On the end day of a sprint, all the tasks are closed. The time remaining effort becomes 0. During the process, on day 3, this 50 represents the number of tasks. This represents the hours or the day, the time remaining hours. This represents there are 1 task get delivered finished. Day 5, another task finished. Day 8, 3 tasks done. Day 11, another 4 tasks closed. And day 21st, 2 tasks closed. So question, if you think about the burn down report, it represents how the team makes the achievement on a daily basis to finish all the task workload. And then if you think about the working software get delivered to the end user that become useful, then you would conclude on day 11, if the working software gets delivered, then some of the functions representing these tasks finished can be used. Here's the velocity report. So the velocity report takes a little bit different approach. It associates each task with points and use such points to measure the size of the task so that as you finish the task, the points get accomplished, representing the value you have contributed to the working software by a Scrum team. Meaning some of the tasks have more value than other tasks. Therefore, the contributions a team member makes should not be just based on the number of tasks closed, but rather based on the number of points accomplished by each team member, contributing to the success of the working software with that. That is the velocity report. So why do we see that in the real world the pure Agile process get hybrided? Well, mainly I think it's there are limitations of pure Agile process like Scrum. there's no clear model for large projects with multiple Agile teams. How do you manage the task-to-task relationship when you commit the sprint workload for each team? There's no common object for you to define the relationship of the task being committed for team 1 versus the task being committed for team 2. And there's no clear model of QA testing with the development. As a matter of fact, if you think about the Scrum process, all those process and artifacts are heavily focused on the development process, not on the QA testing process. There's no testing standard. There's no testing plan, test cycle as the artifacts. No support for requirement-driven, so therefore there's no total traceability model, and a few limitations. So before we start to talk about the SpecDD, let's think about what is an ideal Agile development method. And I think any great working software development method should improve the teams, not only the productivity, like the Scrum, obviously it improves a teamwork productivity, but should also improve a team's innovation capacity, sustainable success, repeatable success, and scalable success. And how do you do it? And why requirement-driven? I would say if there's only one factor a team should rely on to improve all the possible successes for an ideal method, I would say communication is the best. It's the most important. And I want to use a real-world project I involved to explain how teams normally communicate with each other. And I think I'm pretty sure all of you will be familiar with this kind of experience. Here is one. So we are working a software function called email announcement. So you create an email such as announcing the SpecDD method, the webinar on the SpecDD. Each of you receive email from us. So we want to send emails, but one of the features I asked my product owner to create is to automate the status of the email sending. Meaning, when you send the email, often you send. Let's just focus on one of them. Say, sending all active customers. So there are 39.25 sent, and to be sent is still 30. And how many failed, and how many opened. And one of the features we want to see is this status change. The status initially should be sending, followed by in progress, followed by sent. So here is a simple, very, very simple status. On the day 1, we create a story or a requirement. We say we need a support status automation. It should support to be sent, in progress, sent, and we believe it's about 2 days of effort. It just make sure the status for any activity can properly change from to be sent to in progress to sent. As a product owner, you would think this requirement is simple enough. There's no need to design other two details of the requirement other than just creating a pictures showing the status at a different stage. But on day 3, after it was first implemented and tested by the product owners, and we found some problems. The problem we found is while you are using one browser to send, initially it pop up in this dialog window like this. So start to send email. Then you do see the status change from in progress and sent. The problem is that when you go to a different browser, we cannot see while this window is pop up. It can take 10 minutes, 20 minutes, even 30 minutes to stay there, because when you have a huge customer base analyzing those emails, analyzing those people who have unsubscribed, analyzing email maybe should not be sent redundantly, it takes a long time to prepare. As a result, when you go to a different browser, the status we found is it's empty. So we communicate with the programmers, and the programmer's answer was, well, we cannot show the status because the state of this email sending doesn't have a value while preparing for data. So obviously you can communicate with the customers, with the programmer says, let's add the status, say preparing for data, and add 2 more to state. But the point I really want to raise is I want to emphasize what we learned from this kind of daily examples. And I think from this kind of example, what we learn is, as a product owner or end user, the customer who use the software, our thinking process is very empirical. We don't really have a concept of there need to be a status state on the server side, remembering its state. Therefore, you can display the status to be initially preparing, and then in process, percentage, finish, then finally finish. We just have a mental image that we want to see this kind of a status changes, but we don't really represent such logic in a mathematical way or discrete math ways. However, programmers think in this process in a reverse way. If there's no status state, there's no value on the server side, I cannot display a status change. That caused the communication gap. And such communication gap, if you think about how the test engineers to think about a software functions like the status email sending, they happen to be thinking the following way. They look at the requirement. They also look at the working software. So therefore, they create test cases to recognize there are something our end user want to see, but let's look at what the working software we have so that we can write the test procedures. So here's the test case 1. When sending a new announcement now, we should see the status changing to be from sending to in progress to finished. And the test case 2, as a matter of fact, I just jumped to test case 3. When you schedule an email to be sent at a future time, today is Wednesday, I want to send an email tomorrow morning, then the status should see from schedule as you see it's scheduled to be sent tomorrow. And then by tomorrow morning, 9 p.m., when it's sending, then it should be sending, then in progress and finished. So the point I want to emphasize is the end user, the product owners, thinking a software based on, this is what I want to see. I do not care how you program it. The developer thinking more like, if I have the math logic in my software, therefore, you can use the software only because I have the functions in my code. And I think the QA people take the compromise. They recognize what the product owner, the end user want. They also recognize that this is what the working software is like. So let's be realistic here's testing procedures. So what we learn from this example, you're going to see fighting. You're going to see people are so talented. And you'll see conflict. If you emphasize, me as the product owner, and I recognize the value of my customers, therefore, the software ought to be behaving like what people's thinking, more like empirical. It's more like a feel, less matched like 1 + 2 = 3. You'll see people frustrated. So we have to respect everybody's thinking logic. But is it true we must create a standard for better communications? That, I think, is why Agile emphasizes user story need to be the communications, making the requirement to be less complicated, recognizing every product function has user values. It actually makes the communication more effective. And SpecDD takes one more step much forward on this. Communication actually is the most important factor in creating an ideal development method. So here is a SpecDD process model. A software project is indeed mainly consists of a set of development iterations. It's about creating the working software. That's the center of a process. It contains the development process, which is more like Agile, where a set of product features and defects get committed as the sprint backlog. The SpecDD Agile team working on a daily basis to drive such features to become working software. They do have the daily Agile, the daily stand-up meetings, and the working software get created. However, such sprint backlog is not necessary only from the product backlog, but it could be from the requirement. It added a requirement to be a not consumable item like the product backlog, meaning the product backlog item once get consumed to become working software. They don't really stay as artifact. The requirement stays. The requirement, there are artifacts created specifically to represent the requirement. And such requirements not only are serving the purpose of committing the sprint backlog for development purpose, but they are also used to create a testing standard, the test cases living in the testing library. And therefore, you can actually create a release test plan based on the fact this working software has now contains a set of requirements already get committed and converted into the working software. Therefore, we actually can create a release test plan based on the fact there are so many test cases connected, linked with the requirement. And based on the testing plan, you can create multiple testing cycles and run the testing cycle to make sure the working software gets tested on a daily basis to test against a set of testing tasks based on the testing case testing standard defined. And the end result of the testing cycle, which is not necessarily need to be synchronized with the development iterations. And such testing effort actually contribute the fact now you have found a set of defects. And the defect gets populated into either the product backlog, and occasionally for those crazy teams, they assign a defect, let the QA team to assign them directly into a sprint backlog. Okay, so SpecDD process recognize that a development process is about committing a set of sprint backlog from the product backlog or from the requirement directly, make them committed to create the working software. During the creation of the working software, the Agile team is a fully capable team, like the Scrum process. The Agile team consists of both programmers and the joint integrated QA members and the user interface designers. But the Agile team not only convert the committed sprint backlog into working software, they are responsible to further improve the requirement. As the working software becomes available, people will recognize the fact the initial requirement is not complete, such as you see the email announcement functions I just described start to behave itself, you will see, you forget that as you send the email announcement, if you happen to be another team member, another product manager who opened another browser looking at the email announcement, you need to improve the requirement to reflect the fact that during this 30 minutes preparation data time, there will be better to add a status showing it's preparing for sending. Without the working software, how can you request a product owner or designer to be that smart, to be that detail-oriented, to cover such all the details of the features? In other words, the working software will be used, and the sprint development process, it is a process of sometime refining the requirement, sometime creating and improving the test cases as well. So we will have another, I would say, 4 or 5 hours to talk about this process. And I think this process model, I spent like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes describe this process briefly. I hope this represents a way of recognizing Scrum process is beautiful. It helps our Agile team to gain productivity, and I love it personally. But just gaining the productivity is not good enough. Innovation of a team cannot be really improved and improved and purposely built to improve a team's innovation without recognizing the business intelligence, the intelligence of deciding what function to be in the working software, what functions can be delayed, without the artifact of the requirement which stays instead of burned out. Such intelligence will be missing. Without the testing artifact, the test cases, the testing plans, and the test cycle process to reflect the fact that there are process, there are meetings, there are artifacts dedicated for QA process, how can you expect a multi-team Agile project to be done with good quality, controlled, and repeatable? So that's why I created the SpecDD method about 8 years ago. Over the years, continuously spent the effort to improve this methodology. So the same process, if you kind of can try to have a mental image of this process, mainly it's Scrum-like development process, but it's added the quality process, it's added the requirement to be above the product backlog. So from the object point of view, and I think the process model talks more focus on the people, the activities. This hybrid object model, this SpecDD hybrid object model is more like let's recognize the artifacts Obviously, if you think about a Scrum process, it's really all lives inside the development space. But we added the requirement objects. We added the test case object. And we added the regression testing cycles, and the task representing the testing. So the product backlog and the development space is really about the same as the Scrum process. So if you think about the Scrum process to be taking the product backlog, commit them to become a sprint commitment, you're going to have multiple sprints. And inside the sprint, you're going to have story and development tasks, right? But we want to add requirement. So requirement consists of epic, consists of spec. A story, actually, in the SpecDD model, is not a requirement. It's a copy assigned to a development, meaning spec 1, once assigned to a development, it becomes story 1. If the same spec 1 need to be assigned to a different team member to work on as an implementation assignment for the purpose of different module, for the purpose of a different platform, and the story 1 represent the implementation for iPhone, and the story 1, 2, the second copy of the story for the spec 1 representing the implementation effort for Android tablet. It's a 2 assignment of the requirement commitment. But in order to finish a story or implement the commitment of a requirement spec, you're going to create multiple development tasks to implement them. So how about the test cases? Well, those test cases are created to recognize the fact when you have a requirement, you should dynamically create test cases. That's why a test case 1, 2, representing the testing standard for a requirement feature spec 1, it can be used to create subtasks for a development task to represent the testing effort needed to assure the development task gets finished with quality control. Obviously, during the development sprint, it's not only about assigning, using test cases to create QA testing subtasks. It's also about creating QA testing tasks assigned to the Agile team programmer or the Agile team QA, joined QA member. I call them as QA floaters. They will also help to either create or improve test cases. Really, this should be a 2 bidirectional arrows. This line should be bidirectional. So test cases get used to create child tasks to testing the development quality of a development task. And such QA testing effort within a development sprint will enable the QA floaters and the Agile team member to improve the testing standard as well. On the regression testing side, with this testing standard, with all these requirements become working software, really you should have a separate QA testing team to create test plan and to create test cycle to test the quality of an integrated software. If you think about an Agile project with multiple Agile team, really you think about this development space is going to be consist of multiple teams, each running their sprint, and the integrated working software really need to be tested by a coordinated but independent QA testing team with regression testing purpose. And then such testing effort help you to populate more of the defect in the product backlog. And obviously the product backlog are the sources as well as the requirement are the sources get used by this line and this line to show the fact within a development sprint, not only you have to be committing a set of requirement specs, you'll be committing tasks for the defects as well as the commitment. So occasionally, I use a screenshot of our software to show you what is, to show you the concept introduced in the SpecDD process. In this case, I use a screenshot to represent what is a sprint backlog. So in this case, the sprint backlog representing all the stories, all the tasks belong to a sprint here, right? If you think from the previous picture, a sprint backlog represents this picture represents a sprint backlog. But if you try to see the inside, it's going to be a set of stories and tasks and possibly QA testing subtasks as well inside the sprint backlog. They are committed from the requirement and from the product backlog. Then if you see more details, then you start to see each team member has the committed stories and the tasks. So in other words, the entire sprint backlog of Sprint 1 consists of all the story and the tasks assigned to each team member. Obviously, the time spent and time remaining, time spent 4 hours, time remaining 0 hours. The time remaining of each task represent how the team members are driving them to finish the task based on the fact they estimate, oh, for this development task, it's going to be about 1 day I can finish. But then we want them to prove, we want the team member to drive themselves to finish the task within, hopefully, the time estimated as a target to accomplish it. So that's the sprint workload. Okay, so I would like to do a kind of a class topic and presentations. So I would like to use this example to ask you to do your best to create 2 or 3 PowerPoint slides just using text or boxes to illustrate if you are going to create a set of epics and specs representing the requirements and possibly, maybe even defects. How would you, using this model I just described, how would you create 2 sprints and assign such requirement as stories into Sprint 1 and Sprint 2? I would like you to create 2 sprints. I would like you to use slide number 1 to show you this is your defect backlog or product backlog. And this is your requirement that contains, say, 10 epic, and then use maybe 1 epic or 2 epic to break them down into specs, and then assign them as stories to Sprint 1 and assign them to Sprint 2 as story, and then break the story into tasks. So before I do that, I want to emphasize this picture. So this is the pictures. Basically, you will be making them to be 2 or 3 slides. And then I would like you to raise your hand, meaning that you would like to talk about this is your understanding how the SpecDD is trying to connect the requirement with the development sprint commitment and ignore the testing for now. As we continue the presentation, the training on the quality management. Later on, we will use the same example for you to add more PowerPoint slides to add the quality piece of it. So for now, I'd like to emphasize in the SpecDD, epic represent a big ideas. They are often break down into specs. Ignore the document for now. And they break down into specs, and specs represent the smaller, user-friendly, development-friendly breakdown requirement that can be assigned to development sprint. And as you assign such spec to development sprint, they become stories. And stories are broken down to development tasks, and the tasks are estimated with time remaining. So if you can include time remaining, that will be plus, because then you can talk about, how would you estimate a development task by time remaining or by points, and how would you imagine the burn down report will be created based on your 2 or 3 PowerPoint slides. So with that, I would like you to do your best to spend 10-15 minutes. Please do your best, and in 15 minutes we can resume the presentations with 1 or 2 members, each about 5 minutes to talk about this is your understanding. And based on my previous trainings, such exercise is very, very useful to achieve, to get better results. So let's start it.